Gunja, you can go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Today we have with us our alumni, Mr. Neil Samani, who will be taking over today's session. He was he is a major in industrial engineering with a master's degree in financial engineering. He was also the recipient of the best bachelor's thesis project proficiency award for his project on portfolio optimization using enhanced risk. And currently he's working as an associate at Deutsche Bank in London. We welcome you to take over today's session, Mr. Samani. Thank you.
Thank you, Gunja.
Thank you, Gunja. Thank you, Professor Mishra, for giving me this opportunity. And I hope all of my fellow colleagues, fellow students, you would find this session interesting. Yeah, as Gunja introduced me, I'm an alumnus from IIT Kharagpur. Not long ago, I was sitting in your seat, and thank you, Gunja, for mentioning my thesis. I feel proud to mention that Professor Mishra was my thesis guide, and I still remember visiting him for all the guidance on my thesis. So, yep. So we can start the discussion today. Let me pull up the slides that we should be looking today, and we can have this session as a two-way session, but so that it's not a bit of boring for everyone, and also at the same time does not stop the flow. What we can do is you can put your questions on each slides on the chat whenever you have, and then I'll take those questions and try to address in between the slides. And then towards the end, we can leave a bit of time for Q&A, which could be related to the slides or anything else that you would want to speak regarding, like you would like to know from me, which is where we can have voice voice-based conversation where you can unmute yourself and speak if you prefer, or on the chat, whichever way it works. So let me share my screen. If one of you can just tell me if you can see my screen on the chat, that would be great.
It is there, but it is with the other slide also. I think your view.
Okay. Let me change it 1 second. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me know. So yes. So let's start our discussion. I'm pretty sure many of you must have read about derivatives, but let us quickly just skim through what we know, refresh our memories, and for the benefit of people who haven't read much into this topic, this would be a good starter. So we see what are financial derivatives. So derivative word can be traced back to the Latin word derivare, which means literally that something that comes from something else. And we use this term derive or derivative quite loosely in our daily conversations. And if we try to put perspective, I think this is the most intuitive what will come to. So in the financial domain, we use this term derivative for products, which derive their value from a basic fundamental underlying a product or an asset. And you see, why do these derivatives exist? So fundamental objective of any market participant is to maximize return and minimize risk. I'm sure in this course, in the previous lectures, you would have gone through some concepts of budgeting, risk return, and related stuff. I think derivatives are one of the useful tools for meeting those objectives as well. Now, the most common first thought or advice, if you think about it, is okay, you start earning when you get a job or when you have a salary. You must have heard from your parents or acquaintances, family, friends that okay, spread out your investments. Don't put your eggs in one basket. Diversify. You need to reduce risk. That is the first thing that people think of when they want to risk manage to avoid loss. But there are practical limitations to this approach. Sometimes, let's say I have 10,000 rupees and I want to put it somewhere. Then it doesn't make sense for putting 5,000 in one place and 5,000 in one place. I mean, the amount is pretty small, and sometimes it might not it might not make sense for that additional hassles. But now, if you're investing 10,000 rupees in I don't know, some equities, and then you just want to hedge it, you can maybe buy an option, which, I mean, of course, for 10,000, it's not the commensurate size, but let's hypothetically imagine you can buy an option and the lot size is allowed. I think it will cost around 10 or 20 rupees to just buy an option. Now, of course, we'll go into details about options for those who might not have read in detail, but this is how these derivatives, they help for these practical limitations, like as I said, capital money constraint or lack of ability of desired hedge, and so on. So basically, and as we look at many derivatives in the session, we'll see that they provide a very flexible way to manage risk. And I'll try to give you examples of derivatives that I've seen while I've worked, and how learning this stuff in the classroom is directly applicable in day-to-day job. So yes, as I said, relatively cost efficient, convenient, and accurate. So who are the users of financial derivatives? Financial derivatives can mainly be classified in three broad categories. It's okay. So hedgers, speculators, and arbitragers. These are the main three things we read in any text on financial derivatives, and I guess it's easy to classify any market participant that you take into hedgers, speculator, or arbitragers. So let's take an examples of few market participants that participate in this market. So for myself, I'm a trader at Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank is an investment bank, and so when I trade on behalf of investment bank, I could be either doing hedging activity or arbitraging activity. Like, banks are not allowed to speculate. So when I'm doing hedging, what I'm doing is I'm doing it on behalf of a client. Like, client says that, okay, I have an X risk, I want this option, can you execute it for me? So I'm hedging that risk. Arbitraging is sometimes, okay, there are strategies you offer your clients where you say that this is a distortion in the market, where you are able to buy something at a higher price and sell it at a lower price somewhere else, which is like location arbitrage that we see in text. So these are the kind of strategies we are like, banks keep selling to the market, and they can be arbitrages as well. Now, if you think about other market participants, the hedge funds, pension funds, corporates, like, you name any participant and you would be able to classify them into one of these three categories. Now, the most interesting thing where I said, like, details of derivatives that exist across different asset classes. So mainly, I normally would like to classify these main asset classes or verticals where I see the options, and then I see how like which are the main options that not options, but which are the main derivatives that exist in this asset classes. So derivatives, like the normal derivatives, if someone asked me, I would say, okay, there are forwards, there are futures, there are options, and there are swaps. But now each asset class, based on its characteristics and requirement, leads to a certain type of products that are prevalent in the market. So which are the ones that I highlight on the table that you can see. So for equity, we have futures, call option, put option, equity asset swap. So I'll just quickly, briefly describe in one line what these are. So futures. So what are equity futures? Equity futures is basically a contract which gives you exposure to the equity or the share that you like. So let's take an example. If you want to buy one Reliance share, it costs you, I don't know, I remember the price from when I left college. So I guess around 960 or 1,000 rupees, let's say. And you want to buy it, but then you have to put 1,000 rupees. And you think that in a month's time, your price would be, say, I don't know, 1,030 or something, and you want to leverage up your exposure. So these future contracts, when you go into the market, they would have a certain lot size. So basically, one contract would give you exposure to X underlying share. So it's like when you buy one futures, you might be exposed to like 100 Reliance share or something. Now, these are only hypothetical numbers. I have not actually invested. Now you'll think that, okay, a trader is not investing. The reason I'm not investing is when we trade for the bank, we are not allowed to take positions for ourselves. So that's why relative hypothetical example. So I beg your pardon if my numbers don't make sense, but there would be something like this. So these help you take position. So that, as simple as that, you have a delta 1 exposure. So price moves by 1 rupees, you lose, you'll gain 1 rupee or lose 1 rupee depending on whether you have bought or sold the future. Then we have call options and put options, which give you right to buy, which is a call, right to sell, which is a put. Of course, so that we don't end up going off track, I'll just mention this and we can discuss these options if and when required. Then we have something more exotic, which is equity asset swaps. So what is equity asset swap? So as the name suggests, it is an asset swap. What happens is there are two parties where one party owns the equity and second party wants to own the equity. So what people do is, okay, one party lends this equity to the another party in exchange for regular periodic cash flows. So, and there can be many types of exchanges, like, I don't know, you can think of it and come with it as long as you're able to price it. So it's a pretty bespoke domain. Then we look at foreign exchange. Foreign exchange, the different one is forwards. Now, forwards and futures, I am sure you must have read and discussed. These are pretty much similar products. The only thing different is the risk associated. Futures are normally exchange traded. Forwards are normally bespoke and OTC. Futures have less counterparty risk. Forwards have slightly more counterparty risk because there's no intermediary in between, and there is a chance that your counterparty might not honor the contract. Then you have FX swap. FX swap is again exchanging foreign exchange exposures. Like, for example, I have GBP sterling, you have INR. I say, oh, you know, I want INR. You say, I want GBP sterling. Then I say, okay, you know, let's do an FX swap today, and say that, okay, I'll give you I don't know, I'll give you 100 pounds. You give me 100K of rupees, and in a year's time, we'll exchange it back at I don't know, 102, which is the forward price. And you are happy, I am happy. You know what you'll get after a year. I am happy what I'll know I have to pay after a year or something like that. So that's an FX swap. Commodities, again, forward futures, call put options, interest rates. Now, yes, I actually do interest rates in my daily job. So as we go ahead, I'll go more in detail into interest rate products. So right now I'll just mention them. It's STRS, FRAs. So sorry, when I say STRS, I mean short-term interest rate contracts, FRAs, which are forward rate agreements, higher swaps, higher swaptions, caps, and floors. Now, caps is basically, as the name suggests, a maximum rate that you would pay or receive. A floor is the minimum rate you'll pay or receive. And whenever you fix something, there is always a value to it. In credit, okay, these are the fancy names: credit default swaps, CDOs, CLOs, CNNs, credit default swaps. Everything like anytime this word comes up, I am pretty sure all the financial students, professors, and professionals in general, the first thing that will come to mind is 2008 financial crisis. So I'm pretty sure many of you must have read about it. And then there are other exotic structures, Asian options, barrier options, basket options, binary options, you can name them all, which are relatively less common, but not as uncommon as we would think when we read about it. Because I've seen a bit of these, and I think I have traded barrier and basket options at some point, so we can discuss. So then, yeah, we look at derivative markets in India. Now, it's quite amazing to see that derivative markets existed quite back in time in India in 19th century. As we would expect, primarily in agricultural commodities, which was banned since 1952 to avoid price volatility. And as you know, after independence, we needed price stability so that the less income class is not, adversely affected with the price movements due to speculation in the market. But derivatives market restarted back in mid 2000, starting with futures, then options, index option, and now they're gradually developing in all asset classes, which is quite good to see. Current traded products include futures, options on assets. So when I say asset, it's commodities or currency or equities, and then indices is of course Sensex and Nifty and so on. And then interest rate derivative. I think in India we trade swaptions and swaps. The market is pretty good, but it's still in nascent stage when you compare with other markets across the globe. But I think we are getting there. RBI is periodically reforming, and this is one area that I keenly follow for my personal interest, because at some point I would like to trade interest rate products in Indian market, which I normally currently do for the other markets across the world. So I'll just highlight some notable reforms in derivatives, which I think will make Indian markets more interesting, give all the market participants in India more tools to manage their risk. And also for us as professionals, it will give us an opportunity to actually trade or offer solutions to the clients, which we learn in the class. So that's another interesting thing. I find it very amazing. So first one is the rupee interest rate derivatives directions 2019. Of course, you can find these directions on the RBI website, but I'll just highlight the main points that I think are getting implied from this directive. So first one is in 2019, the reforms, it gave stock exchanges the flexibility to design, structure standardized products based on market requirements. It gave market makers like banks and brokers to offer tailor-made products to corporate and non-retail entities. Now, when I say this, before this, I think the products that you could offer were very restricted to only, I say, OIS swaps. which were like pretty standard in structure, fixed float, you just give the notional and that's it. You cannot go and tailor make those products. So, which I guess was a obstacle in development of this market. There was a failed attempt, I think, which I would like to quote on interest rate futures in Indian markets in, I guess, in the first decade of this century. And it slowly died down because the volume never actually picked up. So I think this reforms hopefully would further provide all those instruments and liquidity to make this market a real viable one in India. Then there were late last year in September, we had a draft interest rate derivatives directions, which mainly allow foreign portfolio investors to undertake rupee-based transactions subject to some conditions. Now, we can, of course, discuss why this is important. I'll quickly just tell you why. Rupees, as you know, they are global multinationals. They have revenue sources in India. We have Indian multinationals which have revenue sources globally, and there's a lot of cross holding. Like, as you know, Jio has investments from Facebook, Tata has investments in Jaguar, and so on. So there's a lot of foreign interaction, and all of these corporates, they require to hedge their currency risk or interest rate risk or based on the jurisdiction. So let's say someone wants to hedge INR risk. There were a lot of controls in place. Like, for example, as you might be aware, there are capital controls around FX. So you can only move X amount of money outside India, like by selling INR and getting dollars and GBP, which of course is a very big size if you look at people like us, individuals. But if you look at companies, it's very small. So it becomes difficult to find these hedges in this market. So what has happened over time is there has been an offshore market prevalent for INR, and the size of offshore market has increased a lot because of these controls. And I think the reforms that RBI is introducing would bring that volume of trade back to onshore and bring it under RBI regulatory purview, which I think would be good for the market and also would curb the volatility. There's extensive literature available. We can discuss at some point. You can also read about it. So I guess these directives are aimed to reduce that. And then, yes, it also broadens the permitted products that you could offer to retail users. Low net worth individuals, probably at some point we might also qualify, but then we can only qualify if we are using it to hedge some of our exposures. So I don't know, probably if you are holding some government securities, then you can go to some bank and say, okay, I have this government securities, I want an option to hedge it. Otherwise, if you just go and say, oh, I think the price will go there, I want this option, probably we're still unlucky. We might not be allowed to do that because these are highly risky products and the notional sizes are a bit far away from the reach of retail users, unfortunately. Then we have non-retail users, which are big corporates, mutual funds, pension funds, which are allowed to do these products that retail users are allowed, but they will additionally be allowed swaptions and structured products with certain exclusions. So if you ask me, where does this regulation take Indian markets, I think it is a very big step, because I've read the exclusions and there are only a few. So these will increase a lot of product offerings in the market, and probably looking at the reforms frequency, like happening every 1 or 2 years, I think in another 4 or 5 years, we might have a full broad suit, depending on how the liquidity develops in this market. And yes, recently, 2 months ago in February, they also released draft guidelines on credit default swap. Now, these might be a source of debate, because then people say, oh, credit default swaps caused the financial crisis. Do we want it for India? What if something similar happens to the Indian economy, and especially after a pandemic like this that we are in. So, but I think RBI has provided pretty good. I mean, of course, all these opinions are my personal. RBI has provided pretty good guidelines, which provide protection to all the market participants, at the same time giving them a tool to transfer and manage credit risk. So as long as there is a regulatory oversight, I think these instruments are pretty good in serving the purpose that they're designed for. And if used it correctly, I think there might not be 2008. So it's all down to how it is used and how it is regulated. And of course, to mention, these are draft guidelines, so these are open for public comments. Now, I've never tried myself to reply to this, but if some of you are interested and really follow this and you want to reply, my interpretation is, I guess, as a part of public, you are able to reply to this draft, directives if you think there is something they could add or, remove, because it's not like we are just students and humko kya pata hoga, but it's more like you can always point out something which someone might have inadvertently overlooked. So yes, so I have a question from Avi Agarwal, who says, sorry, yeah, it's everyone. So I think you wanted to ask. So yeah, it says, how is CDS different from insurance? Okay, so how do I put it? So yes, so credit default swap. So what the structure is, there is a credit. So okay, how would I do a credit default swap? So let's say I have a loan, right? And you have loaned me that money, but you're not sure that I'll pay you money. You think, oh, Neil is a credit risk, he might not pay me back. So you want protection against that. You go to Professor Mishra and say, oh, sir, Neil, I've loaned this money and I want to get protection. So Professor Mishra will say, okay, pay me 5 basis points on the notional and every month. And if Neil doesn't pay you back, I'll give you, I don't know, 90% of money that you have loaned to him. Now, this is how it works. So to answer your question shortly, it's kind of an insurance. I mean, you can call it an insurance. The way it is different, well, I guess it's down to the market participants, because you can always, I mean, it's an insurance, yes. I would pitch a credit default swap as a insurance strategy. I mean, if you still say no, you need to find a difference, then I could probably say in insurance, your payout is fixed. Like I mean, if you look at normal life insurance or something, you have fixed amount which you'll be getting. In CDS, as I said, 90%. Well, these recovery rates, there might be different covenants in your agreement where it, you might have that if this happens, then 90%, if that happens, then 80% or something like that, which again, I guess is there in insurance contracts. So I think it's the same. So like, why is insurance allowed in India, but not CDS? Well, insurance is easy to understand because let's say, I mean, you and me, we know that, okay, we want to do health insurance or life insurance. What we're saying is we give like X thousand rupees and then we get a cover of X lakh rupees. And that's it. So it's like pooling of money. What you think is the 100 people coming together, putting 10,000 each, and then realizing that out of these 100 people, only 1 or 2 will require that pool of money. So that's insurance. Pretty easy to explain to investors. But now credit risk, well, I know it's easy to put and say that, okay, credit risk is just loaning the money, the example that I gave. But where it becomes difficult is these loans or debt that the corporates have, these have long legal text with different types of cross references and covenants that they are normally called, which can get triggered that, okay, if so and so subsidiary happens to defunct, then the cash flows are affected. So it's relatively very complicated for someone, for an average user in India to understand, because as you know, the financial know-how in India is not as developed as we would like normally. Like we professionals, we might understand how these things go, but then again, there are things sometimes we don't understand because of lack of exposure or lack of available experts in the field. So I think that's why. But you might think that as of today, there are a lot of people learning finance, a lot of professionals. Why should this not be allowed? I guess probably this is what RBI has realized, that now there's enough expertise available and they should be able to allow. So I guess once, so if I remember well, the end date for this consultation from RBI on CDS is 15th March 2021. Was actually, it's in the past, I'm sorry. So hopefully if they notify these regulations in June, I think this will be allowed. So these query of ours will be resolved by then. But I think this is my take on why it was not allowed.
Just a minute, Neil. Yeah, actually credit default SIP is allowed in India with restricted participants in late 2013. Now RBI is opening it up so that more and more player can join that.
Okay.
It is not allowed in India. It is allowed, but in a limited extent.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Professor Mishra. Probably I missed that point, but yes, as Professor Mishra said, it was allowed, but now it's being extensively allowed. So yeah, thank you for correcting me on that one. So now we move to the next one. So these are a couple of derivative structures that I think I would want to discuss with you, and these are some products that I trade on a daily basis and in a decent volume, depending on how the day goes. So first, look at a vanilla interest rate swap. Now, this is the most common type of the swap is vanilla fixed floating swap. So as the name suggests, it's a swap where you exchange interest rates, like fixed for floating. So you have some fixed rate liability, but you want to convert it to floating. Your counterparty wants the opposite, and then you do this. So what's the common structure? So the common structure, we can put it like a party A has a fixed rate exposure, but it wants to convert it to floating. Party B wants the opposite. So party A pays fixed rate of X% every month to party B. It receives float rate of Y% every month from party A, and this is done. So how this thing is valued? Well, it is valued. You might have. I think you must have looked at time value of money in this course, and then you basically look at the cash flows, discount them to the present value, and that's it. So on day zero, swap contracts, they're designed to have a PV of 0, and then then however the interest rate moves, it goes in favor of one party or another. But again, the objective of having the exposures converted is met nonetheless. So some float rates in INR swap that are released by FIMDA are INR MIBOR OIS compound, INR MIFOR, MITOR, MIOS, INR benchmark. Now the definition of these float rates you could find on FIMDA website. I think the first one, INR MIBOR OIS compound, has the most liquidity in Indian markets. Earlier it was INR MIFOR, I think, but it slowly moved to the OIS compounding. And of course, it's pretty well defined. There is a formula where you can say that this is INR MIBOR OIS compound. There are very specific rules mentioned in the market. So we, as individual professionals, we can easily derive that value which would be used in any swap contract. So these are IRS swaps. Then we have a relatively not complex but sophisticated version of an interest rate swap, which is a cross-currency swap. Now here the most common is floating swap. So it's used mainly to access funding in foreign markets. So now funding is a very heavy word. I think I might have used loosely here, but so what is funding? Basically, you are an Indian multinational, you want to set up a greenfield facility in US, and for that you would need to spend US dollars. Now, you can always keep converting your INR with approval from RBI to USD and finance your needs. But then, as you know, interest rates in India are higher than US. This might not be the right thing to do in the company's perspective, for example. And also you have an additional risk of foreign exchange. So you are really not sure on what would happen. So cross-currency swaps, they provide a way to solve this problem. So it's like you take a loan in USD, but then you're paying everything essentially in INR. So let's look at the structure, how it happens. So there's a US party, there's an INR party. On day zero, they say, okay, INR party takes 1 million from US party. I think the rupee price is fairly close to what it is now, and it pays back 74.5 million rupees to US party. And now let's hypothetically consider that US party is someone who has interest in India and wants Indian rupees as well. So this is exchange at the start of the contract. Then you decide that, okay, every month you pay my interest and I pay your interest. So it's like US party has borrowed 1 million and lent it to INR party, essentially making INR party as the loan taker. So it pays the USD float rate Y% to US party every month, which US party must be paying it to their bank, or it might be, again, they might have their own capital. It depends. And then same, because INR party has lent US party the rupees, it gets rupee float rate payment every month. And then at the end of the contract, they exchange back this money, the initial notional that they had. So what happens here is, in a way, both counterparties, they lock in their foreign exchange. So there's no foreign exchange risk left. As you know, at maturity, they exchange the same, as you can see, same notionals, and everything is sorted. I mean, it's pretty much as if you just put a black cover on US party, it will be like INR party is directly borrowing from the bank. So now this is a very simple illustration, of course. Now there is a distortion which exists in the market. So this is where I think I would like to be a two-way discussion. So if any one of you would like to tell me, what do you think? I'll put some numbers to perspective so it's easy to discuss. So let's say INR interest rate is 4%, USD interest rate is say 1%. Do you think, intuitively, of course, no answer is right, but do you think that it would be a PV0 contract on day zero if it is 1% and 4%? If you think, what do you think should be higher, INR or USD, and why? I mean, if you have any thoughts, and then I'll tell you what I think about it. INR interest should be higher, okay. Where is the pointer? 1 second. I'll just put the numbers here. So X. So let's say, okay, my handwriting is not as good. The mouse. So yeah, should yeah, and Y is 1%. Okay, so now this is the prevalent market rate in India. Let's say you get a INR loan at 4%, you get a US dollar loan at 1%. Do you think still you would swap 4 and 1, or there should be some other factor? Anyone? Okay, no worries. So what I think, okay, let's make it even simpler. What do you think this market would be? Would US companies looking for more INR loans, or you think INR companies look for more US dollar loans? Okay, one. Okay, interesting. So yeah, I think, I mean, it depends on the market. Okay. Yes, Ragini, I think intuitively I'll agree with you. Again, I don't trade this market, this particular market, so I'm not really sure. But intuitively, this is what I would think as well, that INR will look for more loans. So let's move ahead with that assumption that INR wants to access more USD funding. The reason I think same as you, Ragini, and most likely is the same thought process in your mind as well, is because USD loans are cheaper. So if you are able to get the same amount of money at a lower rate, and you think that Forex will not change accordingly, because again, interest rate parity in FX, it's theoretically holds, but then there are many other factors which affect it. So if your view is that foreign exchange that you're locking in is favorable to you and you're getting a cheaper loan, I think it's the way to go. And that's why I intuitively think that Indian companies and institutions would be looking for US dollar loans because they're cheaper. Now, what happens when there is a demand of one thing more than other? The price distorts. So what happens is INR, they keep asking for US loans, and US does not want to borrow INR more because I think they are like, okay, our requirement is fulfilled, we don't want it. But if you still want it, you have to pay me something extra. So what happens is this Y%, it changes to Y plus alpha. Oops, sorry. Yeah, Y plus alpha. Now alpha is this additional spread that you have to pay to the US party. It's like, okay, I'll not give you this swap at 1%, which is the market rate at which you will get it from a bank. I'll charge you 0.25% more, which is a fee for me to provide you access to this market. So there will be this basis, we call it cross-currency basis, that will exist in the market. And of course, there are market conventions on where to put this basis. You can put Y plus alpha, or you can say X minus alpha. It just depends on the type of contract. But in some form or the other, there will be a market equilibrium at a value which is different to X and Y or 4 or 1 or however you put it. Now, this distortion comes because of this supply demand issue. And when there is distortion, there is an opportunity to make money. So normally people who have a lot of USDs would like to earn this extra spread, or people who have access to USD funding, they would like to earn this extra spread. And as long as they are relatively sure about the counterparty credit risk, then they can do this. So let's take an hypothetical example, like a US company, it has access to USD funding. It thinks the INR company is credit worthy, it will honor its obligations, or if it not, the CDS available to hedge their counterparty credit risk is very cheap. It's probably only 0.10%. So what they'll do, they'll go into this contract, give this funding at probably 0.25% higher. use 0.10% out of it to hedge the credit risk. So they get their notional back if the counterparty defaults, and then they make 0.15%. So I guess this is a business model. Like if you come across something like this dislocation and you are able to do this business can be set up. Like it's like you are providing some service and then you're making a markup on it. So I think this is how normally different trading desk works. There are many such trading desks, and I think essentially at the end of the day, if you look at any business, every business can be approximately nailed down into buy low, sell high, add a markup, or dislocation because of supply and demand. I think everything can be explained by these facts. So as long as you are able to think intuitively and fundamentally around this, any business is easy to understand. Is something which I think from my personal experience, and I think these concepts that I learned in class, sitting on your side when I was there until 2019, I think they even today help me understand. I still go back to my notes to say, okay, this is how I developed my intuition back then, and this is how it should be, and everything holds 100% as it should. So I guess, yeah, that's those are the things I wanted to discuss today in this class. I guess we have another 10-15 minutes, 10 minutes probably, where we can like open it up for Q&A. If you have any questions for me related to this topic or otherwise, or whatever Professor Mishra thinks is useful for the benefit of the class as such. Thank you again to listen to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Neil. I think students can ask questions through chat or maybe unmute themselves and ask those. Anyone?
I had one in the credit default swap. Sorry, credit, the way we exchange loans, the second one, the latest one which you taught. Isme, for example, let's say the US company wants an INR loan. They take maybe let's say the Indian company takes $100,000 USD loan, and then equivalent amount 75 lakh rupees at a 75 rupee exchange rate is given to the US company. So now the US company will pay back the interest in rupees or in will pay the interest in rupees or in dollars?
Rupees. So because they have borrowed rupees, they have to pay in rupees, and whoever borrows in dollar has to pay in dollars. So what, same, yeah.
So what was the difference between vanilla interest rate swap and cross currency swap?
Because thanks for pointing out. I should have probably mentioned. So vanilla interest rate swap is in a particular currency. So when you are exchanging fixed rate and float rate, either you do it in USD or you do it in INR. So like, let's say, just to add perspective, this fixed rate X% in vanilla IRS swap would be, let's say, 4% of interest, but in Indian national rupees. And the float rate would be INR MIBOR OIS compound, whatever is the rate, again in rupees, paid by party B to party A. Whereas in here, the float rates and fixed payments exchange are in different currencies and not in a single currency. So yeah, that's the difference between these two structures.
Okay, so in vanilla interest rate swap, even party A also pays in US dollar the interest, and party B also pays US dollar interest.
Correct.
But
this market, just one more thing to add. This market exists in almost all currencies over the world because now this has become a relatively common product. So you can think of it in any currency, US dollar, GBP, INR, like just so that you have an idea about the market liquidity. So yeah.
Okay. So but let's say party B has taken rupees. So if party B has taken rupee and party has taken dollar, shouldn't party B pay back the money in rupees? Why is it paying back in dollars?
Because it has borrowed dollars, right? And if it pays back in rupees, then US counterparty will be exposed to foreign exchange risk.
No, let's say party B has okay. So why is party A paying in dollars. Party A has borrowed rupees, right?
But even party A is paying in rupees. So sorry, I think probably some confusion. So let me say it again. The party that borrows USD will pay interest payments in USD. The party that has borrowed INR will pay interest payments in INR.
In both the cases, cross currency swap and vanilla interest rate swap. In both the cases, this is true.
But again, they're not two currencies. These are two separate examples. So in this example, let's say party A and party B. Party A, okay. In vanilla interest rate swap, there's one difference again, which I should highlight, which will remove this confusion. Is in a cross currency swap, what happens is both parties exchange notionals, dollar and rupees that we saw. But in vanilla interest rate swap, there is no exchange of notionals. So let's take a simple example. I have I don't know 1 lakh rupees INR loan. You also have INR loan, but for some reason, because I'm non-resident, I was given a price which was like, okay, I don't know, I have a floating rate, a fixed rate loan at I don't know 8%. But because you are resident, you get the benefit of more flexible product. You have a floating rate loan, which is I don't know, base rate or BPLR, whatever, MCLR plus X basis points. So, but then you say, oh no, I think MCLR will increase. I don't want to have a floating rate because tomorrow if RBI or banks decide to raise the MCLR rate, then I pay more interest. I don't want to do that. I want only 8%. Then and I say vice versa, that I want a more flexible product. I don't want to fix something. We both enter into this agreement that let's exchange this interest payments. You pay me float rate, I pay you fixed, and vice versa. So essentially, if you sum the amount you are paying to the bank and you are receiving from me or I receive from you, we essentially would have swap our exposures where you essentially convert your floating rate into fixed rate and I convert my fixed into floating. So, yeah. Does that answer your question? I guess Avi, it was you asking.
So I think there are two applications of in vanilla interest rate. So one is for currency risk. I'm not sure if that's true, but the second one which you told me was for fixed to floating interest rate swap. So if I'm scared of, so there are two applications to a vanilla interest rate swap.
No, there's only one application. It's just the interest rate because there are not two currencies in this.
Abhiyog, this is only one slide, but two concepts discussed. Vanilla interest is one concept, cross currency is another concept.
Yeah, I understood that.
Confuse it by heading, the fast heading.
Okay.
There are two different products. Maybe it would have been two different slides, but it's only one slide, two things are given.
Yeah, got it. But the thing was, the confusion was कि इसमें vanilla interest rate में threaten कि you're fixed and floating swap के लिए you're hedging, and then the example is INR MIBOS. So right, that sounds like we're exchanging some currency.
Oh, okay. I mean, there's no currency. It's how the floating rates are defined. The reason I put these names is because these are way they appear on the actual contracts. When you trade INR swap, this is the actual description that will be written. And for the benefit of everyone, if you just Google this text exactly, you'll find the formula and the PDF. That was the reason I put it. But sorry if it is.
No, I got it.
But this is what is supposed to mean.
So
I think, sir, I have a question from. I think it's Akshay Goyal. If no one has a question, I'll probably take this question.
Okay. Maybe he has sent only to you, right? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. So just for benefit of everyone, he wanted to know what my daily job looks like, and he was interested to know how hedge funds work and how it is different to investment banks. So I haven't worked at hedge funds so far, but I have a few colleagues, and I'll try to answer to the best of my abilities. So my daily job, I provide systematic solutions to clients in the interest rate space. So systematic solutions, you must have heard of SIPs in India. So I try to structure similar products, but in the interest rate space and for non-retail clients. So and sometimes one of the things that I would provide, I mean, this is not exactly, but the type of things that I would provide clients is help them solve. So like, for example, take this hypothetical example. The INR party wants access to USD loan. I as a bank have access to USD funding. So I'll provide this structure or this trade to the counterparty. So on a daily basis, my work is to design such products depending on requirements. I mean, of course, this is very vanilla. There are a lot of structured products happening in the market. I mean, sky is the limit. Every day we can come up with a new product. Also, my job is, once I sell these products, now I assume the counterparty position. So I have to hedge the risk, because as a bank, I don't want to lose money. I don't want to speculate. Of course, you will read more about regulations on what banks are allowed and not allowed to do. But my job is to provide these solutions to the clients and hedge them for them in the market. Hedge funds, I think it would be good to tell you this classification. You might have heard it, you might not have. So normally, we professionals, we would classify financial institutions in two types: buy side and sell side. Banks are on the sell side, which provide solutions, and hedge funds, pension funds, these are buy side, which are looking for solutions. So pension funds normally would be looking for solutions to fulfill their pension obligations to their policyholders, or whatever you would like to call them. Hedge funds are looking for solutions to make more money for the investment. So I think how it will differ is the trading job at a hedge fund and a bank is different from this perspective. Like, as a bank, I'm more focused on providing solutions and hedging it for my clients, but hedge funds would be trading products and solutions with me or by themselves with an aim of maximizing profit, for example. So yeah, I think that would be different. And again, I think hedge fund would be more fast-paced, or I don't know. It depends, because there are different sizes of hedge funds. So if you look at, say, hedge funds like Millennium, which have been around for long, which are very big, they might have a culture and work similar to an investment bank. But if you are looking at more boutique hedge funds, you would have more responsibility, more stuff to do than at a bank, which has dedicated teams for a very specific product. So I like at a hedge fund, if I'm a trader, I might have to do IRS and also look out for counterparty risk and FX risk myself if there are no different teams. But if I'm at an investment bank, there is a dedicated team looking at everything. So like for me, I just have to worry about the interest rates, and I can always get help, or pass on the risk to foreign exchange or credit desk, or however it is structured. I mean, it's very bespoke. So yeah, I hope they answer.
Yes. Abhi got one more question, but at the interest of time, we have to conclude here. Okay.
Yes, sure, sir. I mean, yeah. So
it's already 12 o'clock.
It's 12 o'clock. So I think Avi, you can reach me out separately at some point, and we can discuss, or anyone else for that matter. If you drop me an email,
I can share your
even offering financial products on the margin value domain general future market.
Pardon? Who is speaking? Galaxy? All right.
Yep. So, thank you, Professor Mishra, again for this opportunity, and to all students who took this time. I hope everyone stays healthy and safe, and all of us will be. And I wish you all the best, and good luck for your careers. And thank you, Professor, for giving me this opportunity to participate. So
yeah. Thank you, Neil. Thank you so much. We could have organized this session a little earlier, but somehow it could not happen. But anyway, I am happy that we have involved one alumni in this session. So I also wish that from this particular batch that we have, maybe 5-6 years later, somebody invite to the next some other class also. Let me see who proves that.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely. And I hope to be working with some of them soon as well, because our financial community is very small. And yeah, I mean, I've seen people come to work. I do have a few juniors from college who work with me, and also at the same time, I know a few seniors who have took up research projects with the alma mater. So I mean, yeah, so it's pretty interconnected. So I think all of us will be in contact forever as long as we stay in finance. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all the students for being there.
Thank you.
I'm ending the meeting.
Okay, thank you, sir. Yeah, good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.